what I have at the moment is this header that changes font size on scroll, but it's not the font size that we want to change in the final project. It's actually similar to what we have with our navigation. We actually want to change two things. We want to change the weight of the font, but also the width of it as well, so we can play around with it a little bit more. So how do we actually want to change this? So what we have in our code at the moment, in our JavaScript code, is we have two things. We have a minimum, and we also have like the ratio of change on our font size. So the minimum is going to be 12 pixels, and then it will grow at 0.2. As we can see on our page, if we kind of scroll, every 5 pixels, it's 1 pixel more because it's 0.2. So what we want to do is start to change these kind of variable fonts in the same kind of way. So we have two things we want to change: the weight and the width. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to add two more things. We want to change a constant of the font weight. Again, I'm just making these up right now. What do we want to do here? Well, it needs a minimum and it needs some kind of change. So I'm going to make the pixels times the change. What should the change be? Like, how quickly do I want to change the weight? Well, for now, I'm just going to put it as similar to above, 0.2. But this minimum doesn't start at 12 or 0, which it kind of is at the moment. It actually starts at something like 100 and goes up to about 800, 900. So what I'm going to do is actually start at plus 100. So if the scroll is 0, 0 times 0.2 is still 0, plus 100 is 100. And I want to do the same thing for the font width as well. So again, I've made these font size and font weights up. Again, I'm going to make a third one in here called font width. And again, this is going to look kind of the same. Pixels times 0.2. And we start at 100 as well. So at the moment, we're only using font size in this change thing down here. But we don't actually want to use font size. We actually want to change the font variation settings. So I'm going to get rid of a few things. I'm going to get rid of this font size. We don't really want it like Untitled Sans. If we get rid of that, then this won't work. So I'm going to get rid of this as well. And what I want to do is add these two things in. Now, how do I add these two things in? So if you remember from before in our style.css, how do we change these two things? We add font variation settings and we have this. So I want to add something that looks like this, and I want to insert this and this number. Now I want to keep the rest of it because I need weight and width to know which thing is which. So I need to kind of copy how this looks. So in my scroll.js, what I want to change is in my H1, I want to change the style for, I've written it above, font variation settings, font variation settings. And this is going to be equal to what? Well, again, if we look at our style sheet, we've already got some of these quotes in here. So how do we add more quotes in this quotes? Well, the kind of easiest way is to add this backtick. So backtick, I'm going to add inside here now. I can add some quotes. So width is 100, comma, the weight is 100, sorry, wrong way around. And the width is also 100 too. Now this is freezing it in stone at the moment. So whenever we scroll, it's always 100 on both. So now if I scroll, notice I did tiny little bit and it changed. I can refresh the default and then change. So if I do this one scroll, it instantly changes it always to this. Now if I make that really clear, I can change that to something like 800. So now if I change this, again, if I scroll at any distance, it flicks to that. But we don't want it to flick to that, we actually want to do this calculation. So how do I insert font weight in here and font width in here? So because I'm using this backtick here and here, I can actually insert variables from up above, these constants, into my code. So to do that, I'm going to remove 100 because it changes. And I'm going to use a $sign and then 2 curly brackets. Now the 2 curly brackets means do this within this string. String is just something that stays the same each time. The previous version stayed the same each time. We're going to insert in the middle of the string a font width. Now font weight first, isn't it? Font weight. So it's always going to be 800 width, but the font weight is now going to change on scroll. So if I look, if I start to refresh, So you can see it's getting thicker as I start to scroll. It's not too dramatic. I might want to start to increase the rate of this. So to increase the rate of that, at the moment, the font weight is just changing at 0.2, maybe 0.4 might be the way to do it. Maybe double the speed. Let's see it now. That feels a little bit quicker. That looks pretty good. But I also need to change the font width. So this 800 is going to go. There it is. And I'm going to use a $sign and 2 curly brackets. And in here is going to be font width. So this is going to check this. This is going to start increasing the strange width of this. So let's see it now. So start to scroll. You can see it getting wider. So maybe that's doing too much. Maybe I want to kind of reduce this width. The bold looks okay, but maybe I want to kind of change that as well. So maybe I want to kind of reduce this a little bit further down. So 0.1. So let's check now. If I go to the top, that feels a bit more natural. Now there's obviously one more issue that we have. If I refresh the page, the default should be when it's at 0. So if I scroll down, it flicks. How do I remove that default? Well, I just need to set this in my CSS as the default. What would the default be based on this calculation? At the top of the page is 0. So I just get rid of this and get rid of this. It's just 100 and 100. So in my style sheet, to stop this kind of jump happening, I'm going to take this font variation settings from here, and I'm going to put it on my H1 to match it up. So now this is the thing that changes each time. So when I scroll up and down the page, my H1 is changing its font variation settings on this and on this by doing this calculation. So now if I go to the page and start to scroll, you can see this kind of weird effect coming into play. And this feels fun. It feels really kind of interesting. It's very, very different than what we had just 20 minutes ago. So what we can see here is by adding this kind of variable type into this page and using a bit of script, we can add very kind of different things on the page. Now, one thing to kind of add before we move on to the next project is JavaScript is clunky. What we're going to do next is, if you find this pretty scary, no doubt you do, we're actually going to introduce a brand new thing called P5 to make drawing on the web really, really fun. And we don't have to write all this horrible JavaScript. There'll be a little bit of JavaScript, but it won't look as tricky as this. So I promise the next project, we are going to use a lot more JavaScript, but it's going to look a lot simpler than what we have here. So the reason for using this new library is we've added these kind of changes in place. But what we want to do is start to break the font. At the moment, we're only working with the parameters of what is given to us by the type foundry. But what we want to do is start messing with our typography. We want to change things and do it in our own way. At the moment, we're kind of doing what's within the bounds of the type foundry, but now we're going to start breaking the fonts even more.